Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is September 24, 2020. This is a record-breaking fifth video in the same day. And the subject of this video is the Communist Party USA telling you to hashtag vote against fascism for Joe Biden. What? So we're going to vote against fascism by voting for a fascist collaborator and enabler and probably just closet fascist himself. Interesting theory. So we have been down this road a number of times on this channel before. I think the first one was Noam Chomsky, then Vaush invoking really haphazardly cited Marx, Engels, and Lenin and Mao even quotes, as well as some ultra-lefts and other like random trot quotes in support of Joe Biden, which in fact were not in support of Joe Biden, but Vaush sort of ran with them anyway. Just did one today on Bernie Sanders, the hashtag Listen to Bernie campaign, where he uses the same let's get back to normal and save our democracy. AOC, as I mentioned in that video, same kind of rhetoric, save our democracy, vote against fascism. Democratic Party starting to actually use the word. Of course, they can't use it too much because they have been building neoliberalism, all the Reagan Democrats, and they've been building the post 9/11 war on terror police state infrastructure, Patriot Act, all that shit. That's totally on their hands as well. The Republicans, of course, have been leading the charge, but Democrats have been there collaborating and enabling every goddamn step of the way. So now we have Communist Party USA. Now, for people not familiar with Communist Party USA, and I've never been a member, it does not have the greatest reputation, to say the least. In fact, its reputation, which, to be fair, I've never seen directly substantiated, is basically, I think one quote I saw was, "It is law enforcement top to bottom," unquote. Now, again, I don't have, evidence to that effect. Let me say, though, that the takes that come out of the CPUSA blog are so fucking bad, they might as well be written by the FBI, even if they're not. So if you didn't like Vaush, you're not going to like what is coming out of, what should be supposedly the premier Marxist-Leninist party in the United States. We're going to do a couple of articles here, and they're really just shit takes. So we're going to start with a tweet that CPUSA put up today. They deleted it, but somebody got a screenshot. So, can we actually vote against fascism? Street fights did not stop the rise of fascism in Germany. Note the the direct action shaming. But what would have happened had the masses of anti-fascist Germans put their differences aside in favor of working class unity against the fascist danger? Okay, well, that we already went down this road directly in the Noam Chomsky video. Basically, there's a thing that like radlibs like to cite where the Communist Party of Germany refused to work with the Social Democrats and vote for their candidate. They didn't want to make a coalition with the Social Democrats against the right and against the center. And therefore, Hitler eventually got put into power, which was not exactly just the result of a popular election. But anyway, this was a terrible tweet. I mean, kudos to them for deleting it. It's a little bit worrisome, though, that it was written in the first place. But as we peel back the layers and step inside the CPUSA website, we'll maybe see that, like, not all is well there. So to recap, what we did get out of the quotes that Vaush was citing, I go to that one because it's the longest video. Please check it out if you haven't seen it. It's almost 3 hours long, and I picked it apart down to the most minute detail. But basically, all of those quotes, particularly the Engels ones, were all about, yes, participate in bourgeois elections, but no, not vote for bourgeois candidates / parties. Okay. And then we get to a finer line with this Germany situation because it was the USSR's position that social democrats were the left wing of fascism and that they called them social fascists. Okay, you can debate that point, but of like, where do Soc Dems belong? Do they belong more with the socialists or more with the liberals? Personally, I think it depends on the Soc Dem. Like, in the final analysis, a diehard social democrat does want to preserve capitalism. However, I do think that within social democracy, there is room for Marxist agitation. If a Marxist were to play it right, it could be useful. But yes, democracy, or otherwise known as capitalism, runs on imperialism, even the kind where they give healthcare to people, to the working class in that country. Social democracy still runs on imperialism, still runs on exploitation, even though it is a kinder, gentler form. It's still capitalism. It's still the system that breaks down every 10 years. It's still the system that deprives workers of most of the fruits of their labor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But so the argument here is that, well, okay, Marxists can make that point, but hey, in the face of this clear imminent danger of like a fascist dictator, just align with the social democrat. I mean, again, we at S4A are not here to like relitigate stuff from the 1930s or 20s in Germany. Okay, that's not what we're trying to do here. And I'm saying that I think that there are reasonably good faith takes on either side of that. So that's not the question at hand right now. What we do have to figure out is, what are we doing in this election? So S4A's position is, based on all the Marxists we've read, socialists should run socialist candidates from socialist parties and build socialist institutions independently of the bourgeois system. That is what I think we should do. That is what I think the history of successful socialism tells us to do. And that's what I think we should do, which means PSL or green. I did a video on that like a couple weeks ago. Go check that out. I break down the PSL and green platforms in detail. Too long didn't read or didn't watch. Basically, I think that while PSL is a Marxist-Leninist party and does take a harder line on some things, their platforms are almost identical. And I think that because the Greens are running in almost every state, the Democratic Party got them kicked off the ballot in a few states, but they're running in like 45 states versus PSL's 15 states. I think it's better to vote for Greens. They'll get a higher national vote count, and we'll see our numbers. But either way, I think that, if Greens and PSL came together in a coalition, there wouldn't be that much disagreement. So let's get into this. Voting for Biden, CPUSA. We have two articles here. The one we're going to start with is Call to Action, Vote Against Fascism, by Communist Party USA. This isn't like just a contributor. This is the party writing this. September 15, 2020. And we have a selfie here of some young chap holding a handwritten sign that says, quote, "Fascism is the power of finance capital itself," unquote. Georgy Dimitrov, hashtag Vote Against Fascism. Let's stop right there. If, I'm not even going to go into, to be honest, I'm not really familiar with the works of Georgy Dimitrov. Let's just take this argument at face value, not even question, the source here. If fascism is the power of finance capital, and finance capital contributes heavily, in fact, to the point you could say controls both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, then how is your conclusion to vote against fascism by voting for a party controlled by finance capital? Now, you would think, end of argument, we're done. But no, because like Vaush, for some reason, they look past the citations that they themselves are supplying, and they just continue to make this non sequitur argument. It's illogical. It does not follow. So let's read. The upcoming 2020 elections, set to take place on November 3rd, are, without a doubt, the most important elections of our time. So much is at stake: our health, our safety, our planet, and our lives. Trump's extreme right policies, which include the Muslim travel ban and the forced separation of immigrant families at the border, on top of the already worsening economic crisis as a result of the coronavirus pandemic, brew a recipe for disaster if indeed the GOP wins big in November. Comment. End of paragraph. Comment. That's true. That's true. A lot of things are looking pretty unstable at the present moment. No argument there. There's climate change. There's the coronavirus. There is the half-assed shutdown that has both allowed the virus to spread while hurting small business and, workers' incomes and just the basic, bottom tiers of the economy where people who relatively are, fairly powerless are struggling. I don't dispute any of that. We're not in a good situation. That's not the argument. But why are we treating the GOP as like a singular threat here? Would the same not apply if the Democrats got into power? Because we know damn well they're not really going to change much. Well, let's see what CPUSA has to say. As communists, we understand that our role in the People's Front... Okay, you can stop right there. The People's Front doesn't exist. The People's Front in the United States... Okay. The People's Front went out the window with McCarthyism. Basically, World War II, when viewed as a war against fascism, and there's other ways to look at it, than that. It was a war between imperialist powers for dominance, and also it was an anti-communist war against the USSR. Because the USSR had such a prominent role in defeating Nazism, communists in Western Europe and in the United States communists, at least in Western Europe, looked forward to the end of the war, where they felt that they could, riding on the success and the the goodwill towards the USSR for having saved Western Europe from Nazism, they were able to join in the ruling coalition somewhat. Now, in the United States, this was, to put it mildly, to a much lesser extent. While it's true that socialists and communists, Marxists, were able to obtain some kinds of positions of authority in Western European bourgeois governments, following this sort of tide of popular sentiment that was pro-USSR, pro-communist for having, defeated Hitler. In the United States, how were communists and socialists treated? Pretty much like dirt, like always. And particularly the Congress from 1946, right after the war, to 1948, Republicans controlled the House for like the only 2-year period of the latter 3/4 of the 20th century. In that time, they passed the Taft-Hartley Act, which was a massive anti-labor, like basically anything that worked about labor tactics, industrial unionism, for example, pretty much anything that actually worked was made illegal. So you want to look at how the labor movement got crushed, which of course is the major backbone of a socialist movement, is taking that trade union consciousness and building it towards revolutionary consciousness. You need the unions. It's really important. The Democrats joined, and we got McCarthyism during that time, which was like an anti-communist witch hunt, which the Democrats assisted in. So while there was a kind of popular front in Western Europe, because I think of the geographical proximity to the USSR, et cetera, also something about, Europe that, there's a lot of factors, but Seems to be some greater degree of class consciousness than in the utterly reactionary United States. That's a whole other topic, though. But the Popular Front in the United States, and we are talking about the Communist Party of the United States, that's a fucking fiction. That the CPUSA is talking about their role in the People's Front. Their role is to sit in the corner and masturbate. I mean, the idea that the U.S. ruling class, any faction of it, would tolerate a communist presence, or let alone like welcome it, is, I mean, absurd is too good of a word. It's like you get an F minus, you get a negative F minus, you get, I mean, just I trying to contemplate what a epic fail that is just the mind boggle. I'm speechless. So no, you don't have a role in the People's Front against the fascist danger. Wow. Wow. Okay. You know, you might think I'm making too much of this, but look at the, you know, starting assumptions, the foundational pretenses logically that CPUSA is using here. They're completely flawed through and through. Actual socialists know right now that both parties are completely complicit in the fascist danger, and that we as Marxists have the very unpleasant task. Believe me, you know, it'd be nice if there was some like liberal ally we could look to. That's just not how it works, though. And the fact that they're suggesting otherwise is, I mean, really gives one pause. These people are supposed to be like the vanguard of class consciousness. Not if you're peddling this trash. So let's proceed. As communists, we understand that our role in the People's Front against the fascist danger is that of promoting and fighting for working class unity around issues. Well, if there's a mealy-mouthed statement, I mean, yeah, I don't even know what that means. Working class unity around issues. Okay. Proceeding, as the Communist Party's Political Action Commission states, quote, the 2020 elections aren't about getting Biden elected as president. This is mainly about defeating a right-wing agenda in the United States, unquote. Okay, except that your proposal is to defeat the right-wing agenda by getting Biden elected. So therefore, it is about getting Biden elected. Now, you could try to be charitable and say, well, it's not about getting Biden elected per se. It's about, you know, defeating the right wing. Guess what, though? Biden is right wing. Biden is right wing. Go look at Biden's speeches about the crime bill in the 90s. He is right wing. He, in fact, refers to, quote, the liberals, meaning he is a conservative Democrat. He's talking in the crime bill things, which he was a total hawk on. He's saying, he's like, I'm not no liberal Democrat. What are you talking about? He makes that amply clear. U.S. politics are so far to the right now. Anyone not differentiating themselves from that is absolutely part of it. And Biden for sure is. So, but this is the kind of like mental gymnastics CPUSA is using is, quote, it's not about getting Biden elected. It's about getting Biden elected. All right, continuing. The progressive and left forces are not strong enough on their own to defeat the full power of the capitalist ruling class in this country, but we can certainly look for points of unity with working people in the so-called center in an effort to defeat the extreme right agenda of the Trump administration in an effort to avoid further setbacks for the working class. Okay, that's a mouthful. So the progressive and left forces are not strong enough on their own to defeat the full power of the capitalist ruling class in this country. I mean, my first thought is they might be if CPUSA wasn't putting out self-defeating organizing tactics like this, we might actually, be running communists in elections and building some energy there. But regardless, I mean, we know you can't vote in socialism any more really than you can vote out fascism. I mean, we Marxists have long advocated use bourgeois elections. Elect whatever socialist you can. It can only help, right? It can only help. But that's ultimately, it's going to come down to force in the end, probably. Okay? So that's basically the consistent Marxist position on electoral politics is like, yeah, vote for a socialist. Good. It can only help. But in the end, it's probably going to come down to force because we're talking about replacing who is the ruling class. All right. They're not going to go down without a fight. They have massive, massive resources at their disposal and they're going to use them. They're not going to just be like, oh, you won fair and square. No. But, whatever socialists can do in government, let them do it. But ultimately, we need to organize independently for revolution. Now, you would think that not just a Communist Party of the United States, but the Communist Party of the United States would know this. And in fact, would be setting an example for the rest of the country. Now, what CPUSA does instead is they do all these mental gymnastics about meeting the workers where they're at. It seems to me actually like they are preventing revolutionary consciousness from emerging. They're not meeting the workers where they're at. They're holding us down because I think a lot of people were to the left of Bernie, for fuck's sake. And CPUSA, supposedly, this bastion of Marxist-Leninist thought, is arguing for a strategy, well, that basically is Bernie Sanders. I mean, maybe it's to the right of Bernie Sanders. So continuing, we can certainly look for points of unity with working people in the so-called center in an effort to defeat the extreme right agenda of the Trump administration in an effort to avoid further setbacks for the working class. How? Because Bernie was the compromise, and we saw how Bernie got treated. CPUSA is pretending like the Democratic Party does not, like some sadistic child, run around like squashing the life out of every socialist it sees like ants. That is what they do. They use their immense resources to just snuff the life out of any socialist or even social democrat organizing under the mantle of the Democratic Party. So how are you going to avoid so-called setbacks? I mean, are they really saying that like the Obama administration didn't have setbacks for the working class? That it wasn't even primarily marked by setbacks for the working class? What is the strategy here? Because this is lesser evil voting that at best buys. So, I don't subscribe to lesser evil voting theory, but if you are going to use it, the reason has to be to buy yourself time, a specific amount of time, to do some other thing that just isn't quite there yet. But it seems to me like CPUSA isn't organizing for down the line. They're putting all their eggs in the lesser evil voting basket, because where are the calls to revolutionary consciousness around this? I mean, the elections are where most people who are political at all, who have any kind of political consciousness, even the smallest political consciousness, this is where they, wake up. This is where they come alive, is to interact with an election, to try to convince their friends to vote for their favorite candidate, whatever. And CPUSA is pissing it away at a time when people are hitting the streets in record numbers and actually making the capitalist class notice. They're telling you, oh yeah, street battles didn't stop fascism. Oh my God. If that's not counterproductive messaging, I don't know what is. So could you have worse messaging? Maybe. I mean, could you convincingly have worse messaging? I'm not sure you could. But again, they're taking this line that Chomsky and Sanders and AOC and all these other liberals are taking. So tell me how it's different. Tell me, what's the grand strategy here? You know, there was a video going around Twitter last week, or maybe it was earlier this week, of a young woman with glasses and a lot of eye makeup screeching in a car about not wanting to vote for Biden, but she is going to because, you know, we can't fuck around with a third party while fascism is on the ballot. And that seems to be in line with what CPUSA is saying here. But guess what? Fascism's never not going to be on the ballot. Electoral organizing, I mean, strategies are just not going to cut it in the first place. So what else are we doing here? And then, you know, CPUSA is trying to say that like they're gaining more ground with the working class by, you know, not alienating them to, you know, tell them to vote for some working class workers' party. So basically they're saying, hi, I'm a communist. Vote for Biden. I hope I haven't alienated you. Like, people who are going to be alienated by being told to vote Green or PSL or CPUSA if they ran a candidate are pretty much going to be alienated by the fact that you said you're from CPUSA. I hate to break it to you. On the other hand, there are rapidly increasing numbers since definitely Occupy and definitely the Bernie Sanders 2016 bid. Rapidly increasing numbers of people who have read about socialism, have read the Communist Manifesto, have started to develop some kind of communist Marxist consciousness. So CPUSA, it's like kind of like how the Democratic Party is trying to get the moderate Republicans and just telling the, you know, gigantic progressive base to just piss off. CPUSA is like, hey, all you Marxists, go fuck yourselves. We're trying to get the moderate centrists. That's like literally what they said here. We can look for points of unity with working people in the so-called center in an effort to avoid further setbacks. Not even to make advances, just to avoid further setbacks. And how do you think that's going to go? Well, the last 40 years of neoliberalism has been one gigantic slide downward. It's a global race to the bottom under capitalism, particularly capitalism without the Soviet Union as a counterbalance, as a countervailing force to, you know, be a bastion of armed insurrectionary anti-capitalism. China exists, and I am largely pro-China. But China's policy is not to meddle with, like, you know, not to try to foment revolution openly in other countries, which was much less the case in the Soviet Union. There's nothing keeping capitalism in check. And we've seen since the destruction of the Soviet Union in the early 90s, first globalization in the 90s, then the war on terror, which was just open, blatant use of force, military force everywhere by the U.S. And now it's like we've got Trump. It's like that on steroids. So how do you think this whole avoiding further setbacks thing is going to go? I don't think it's going to go very well. Continuing, defeating the right wing of the ruling class is our goal in these elections. How do they write this? Defeating the right wing of the ruling class is our goal in these elections, and the future of the class and democratic struggles depends on what we do now. All right. No. We've talked about how there is not democracy in the United States. Hasn't been for a while. The Princeton study on democracy showed that. Just type it into a search engine. Princeton study on democracy. It showed two things. One, 95% of cases, the candidate who spends more money wins, meaning that with 95% reliability, you can buy elections in the United States. Two, it showed that public opinion does not correspond to public policy, but public policy does correspond with donor opinion. They showed that statistically. So meaning that you can buy an election with only 5% chance of failure, and you can buy public opinion, or sorry, you can buy public policy by funding the candidate. So everything with regard to the U.S. government is bought. It's capitalism. Money talks. That's how it works. The government in capitalism is there to manage the affairs of the capitalist class. It's there to keep capitalism running smoothly, to be a central clearinghouse for all the capitalists to do their shit. And it doesn't really have a place for workers. Now, in the 30s, under FDR, because of the coal wars of the 20s, massive strikes, the existence of the IWW back in the day, massive, massive agitation, massive. And the Communist Party and the Socialist Party and all that shit in the first few decades of the Russian Revolution, too. All that shit in the first few decades. And then the Great Depression, of course, the crash in the late 20s. The FDR government was like, we got to stabilize capitalism with some social democracy here. And they did. And they reined in some of the capitalists, and they were like, here, we're going to set arbitration standards for labor unions. We're going to keep the system running, yada, yada. It wasn't socialism. It was an attempt at keeping capitalism more stable. But even that, the capitalist class decided in the 60s and 70s, you know what, fuck it. And in the 80s, they went with Reagan, and we've been going on that neoliberal train of defund, deregulate, and privatize ever since. They want to go back to totally laissez-faire, unregulated capitalism. So CPUSA thinks that we can avoid setbacks and defeat the right wing of the ruling class. There is no other wing of the ruling class right now. Just get it out of your head. I mean, look at how they treated Bernie Sanders. There was, maybe 10% support from the ruling class for Bernie Sanders. Maybe. The Democrats are very right-wing, and the Republicans are extremely right-wing. There is no non-right wing. So how are you going to do this? You're going to defeat the right wing of the ruling class by electing the right wing of the ruling class. No, you're not. And the future of the class and democratic struggles depends on what we do now. Well, yes, the future of the class struggle does depend, like it always has depended, on what we do, because it's not coming from above. Jesus is not coming to save us. Daddy Trump, Daddy Ron Paul, Bernie Sanders, Kucinich, whoever the fuck, is not going to parachute in from the sky and save us. We need to organize it. In fact, I would say, somebody like Howie Hawkins, there's a lot of people like, oh, but the Greens are at 1.5% or 2%. Yeah, well, that's about how organized we are versus where we need to be. Now, again, I'm not saying electing Howie Hawkins is it. There's a lot of organizing that needs to go on behind the scenes. We need to, first of all, reestablish a labor movement because it's been taken out at the knees decades ago. We need to massively organize, join organizations, build them, flush out the toxic crap from the movement, rebuild it with mass numbers. That's what we need to do. So if you look at something like the low numbers of the PSL or the Green Party or the IWW or whatever the fuck else, far left, Marxist or quasi-Marxist organizations, and you say, Jesus Christ, nobody's in these fucking organizations. Our numbers are too low. Nobody votes green. Or, 2% of people vote green. Well, there's your problem. We found the fucking problem. It's like, oh, gee, my car's not moving. And then it's like, oh, there's no gas in the tank. Got it. We found the problem. Is we need people to stop voting Democrat, pull out of the system, and organize for socialism. Not this every 4 years, we try to buy ourselves more time, kick the can down the road. Bullshit. Now, I know CPUSA does some other things, and they'll probably reference that in some of, these articles. But when your main kind of like, if you're trying to build political consciousness in the working class, and your main thing is you're telling people, first of all, you're talking to a working class who 50% does not vote for either Democrat or Republican. They just don't vote. You're talking to a working class who, either liked Bernie Sanders or Bernie Sanders wasn't even left enough for them. And you're telling them to vote for Biden. I'm sorry, you're not doing yourself any favors. You're not doing your class any favors. You're not winning converts. You're not winning converts. You are alienating people who are ready for communism. If people are listening to you when you call yourself, hi, I'm from the Communist Party of the United States, and people are still listening after that sentence, they're ready for communism, okay? They're ready to at least hear you out, not to have you say, oh, I guess we should vote for Biden. That's not, in my experience, what people are looking for, okay? So let alone the fact that it's not going to get us anywhere. I mean, I think that's why, people have realized that voting for Democrats does absolutely nothing for them. It just makes things worse and worse because they're fascist collaborators. All right, moving on. Therefore, says CPUSA, we encourage all anti-fascist and democratic-minded people. They wrote it with a small d, but I think they meant big D. People reading this to sign our voter pledge and share it far and wide. After all, how can we talk about building a mass movement for socialism in this country if we cannot even unite people against fascism? Comment, well, many people are united against fascism, and you're literally like mocking them for having street battles. Now, I don't know that street battles are the most productive use of people's time. I think that at times that they can be important. And I think, yes, we should keep fascists off the streets. Absolutely. We should not let the Proud Boys, set up their version of the Chaz, for example. I do not think that that is a good thing. And we know, for example, that Richard Spencer getting punched in the face and Richard Spencer having Antifa counter-protesters everywhere he went, by his own admission, he stopped touring. He stopped speaking. So those tactics can work. They're not the end of the struggle, though. They're just one, plank of like a dozen things that we as socialists and anti-fascists need to do. Okay? CPUSA doesn't seem to have that nuanced view. It seems to be more radlib, / just Democratic Party view. So, yeah, I would say many people are united against fascism, and most of them have figured out not to vote for Joe Biden, yet that's what you're telling them. Continuing, some may ask, can we really vote the fascists out? Was that how the Nazis were defeated? Can't the Republicans just come back after another 4 years? Well, commenting, no, we can't vote the fascists out. The Nazis were not defeated that way. And the Republicans can and will come back after another 4 years. And in fact, the presidency is not the only seat of the U.S. government. Republicans are in power all over the country at the state and county and town level. Democrats lost 1,000 seats under Obama because they didn't offer anything. After George W. Bush, and I just did a video on this, after George W. Bush, people were like, undo this shit, undo the Patriot Act, undo the war on terror, undo, undo, undo. And Obama got in, and it was change on the outside, continuity on the inside. That is what it was. They kept the wheels of the police state, the wheels of the war on terror, the wheels of imperialism, enhanced imperialism, turning. Because George Bush really, really took it up a level after 9/11, using 9/11 as the pretense. It changed kind of the whole tenor. It was like, well, his George W. Bush's administration came largely from a think tank from the late 90s known as the Project for the New American Century, PNAC. They wrote a document, Rebuilding America's Defenses. It was a far-right, radical far-right vision of remilitarizing America, and they were craven, warmongering lunatics that wanted to do all this shit in service of what they called, quote, full spectrum dominance of the U.S. empire, in service of global capitalism. Obama kept it going. And again, we just did a video on that. So continuing here, the answers to these questions Lion Georgy Dimitrov's speeches to the Comintern, in which he called on the international communist movement to put its ideological purity aside. So here we go with the purity test shit. From the Communist Party of the USA, they're talking purity tests. And to unite with workers, whether they be liberal, conservative, social democrats, or even apolitical, to defeat fascism wherever possible by the most peaceful means necessary. The Communist Party USA continues to use this as its basis for organizing the masses against the fascist danger. Well, take the Communist Party, crumple it up into a little ball, and throw it in the recycling, because that's a crap analysis. I don't know who is writing this. I will say, I have watched some CPUSA live streams. I've taken better shits before. It was the saddest. I felt like, again, it was some like lonely caucus of the Democratic Party that had no budget. It was what it was like watching. It was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. Go watch something by Howie Hawkins, Angela Walker, Gloria La Riva of PSL. It's like 1,000 times more on point. But here we have the Communist Party of the United States talking about purity tests and to unite with liberals and conservatives to defeat fascism. Newsflash, the liberals and conservatives made the fascism happen. Again, this is the like Hitler had a bad childhood theory where like liberals and conservatives were just doing their thing. And then, oh no, a wild fascist appeared. No. Fascism is capitalism in distress. It's capitalism feeling threatened by socialism. And it is rising up to protect, the wealthiest capital, the finance capital, the most abstract kind of capital from socialism. That's what it's all about. And again, this goes back to the foundational quote here, that fascism is the naked power of finance capital. Well, the Dems are in bed with finance capital. So by that logic, you shouldn't be supporting them. Okay, so back to the statement. The Communist Party USA continues to use this as its basis for organizing the masses against the fascist danger. And again, commenting poorly. At best, we ask that you take this pledge and take action in your neighborhood, whether it be in the form of voter registration, mutual aid, building an unemployment council on your block, or setting up a Marxist literature table on a corner to recruit new cadre into the CPUSA. Think before you act, but by all means act. Well, those are completely different things. So, in an article about Vote Against Fascism, we started with a voter pledge, and then, we take this pledge and take action in your neighborhood, whether it's voter registration, mutual aid, building an unemployment council, or setting up a Marxist literature table. So, again, I'm not really seeing the connection, but I guess at least they mentioned these other things. Although, again, putting voting for Democrats on the same sort of level with these other things, I think is possibly harmfully misleading. Okay, so continuing, we also ask you to send in a picture or selfie of yourself holding up a piece of paper or poster board with the slogan #VoteAgainstFascism written clearly. You can write this hashtag alone, or feel free to write an inspirational quote before it with the name of the person who said it. Please send all submissions to comrades Michael and Laura, etc., etc., etc. Let's dump Trumpism up and down the ballot in November and change the balance of forces so that we have a more favorable terrain to fight the class and democratic struggles on. Again, let's see some evidence that the Democrat, they're making this claim that putting, Joe Biden in the White House is going to result in more favorable conditions for fighting the class struggle. I think this is a lazy excuse not to do anything, honestly, and to support a bourgeois party. I mean, to not do the hard thing of pulling away from the Democrats, running our own candidates, and declaring war on the entire bourgeois establishment. Instead, CPUSA, seems to think that they have some kind of alliance with the Democratic Party. I think the only alliance is like whatever Democratic Party hack wrote this shit. Again, I don't have, firm evidence to that effect, but it's like, come on. It's like the Democrats fucking wrote this shit. And I have nothing but contempt for it. All right, so that's the first article. But it's not like that's a fluke. There are like 8 or 10 articles that emphasize the need to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. On their site, just go in and type in Biden or, type in Harris, and you'll get, at least a half dozen articles, all with the same conclusion. It's not about electing Biden. It's about defeating Trump by electing Biden. All right, so here's another one, and I like this article as as evidence against the CPUSA because it's so bad. It's such an insultingly bad, stupid argument for voting for Biden. Okay, it's called "Why I'm Not Voting for My Favorite Candidate This Year" by Joe Sims, August 31st, 2020. In 1968, I was persecuted for voting for civil rights activist and comedian Dick Gregory. Well, actually, I didn't vote for him, but I said I would in a straw poll conducted in my 5th grade class. The teacher objected that Gregory wasn't Nixon or Humphrey, thank God, but I insisted. Next thing you know, I got called to the principal's office. Seems I loved the underdogs. Years later, I collected signatures on the dusty streets of Compton in Los Angeles to place Gus Hall and Jarvis Tyner on the presidential ballot, and then again for Hall and Angela Davis in the next election cycle. I was thrilled when, over a decade later, Jesse Jackson was the Rainbow Coalition's standard bearer. When Jesse stopped running and his campaign manager, Ron Daniels, took up the banner, I enthusiastically supported the hometown favorite. So disdainful of the two-party system in later years, I'd write in Daniels' name when provided no other choice. Daniels was an old family friend whom I met as a teenager at his Freedom Inc. Uhuru Center on Youngstown's South Side. Truth be told, for most of my life, I never met a progressive independent candidate I didn't like. I suppose it's in the blood. Our grandmother, Pauline Taylor, was the first black woman to run for governor of Ohio in 1948. Back then, she stood with Henry Wallace and the Progressive Party. So, by the way, did Coretta King. Even when Ron wasn't on the ballot, he'd have my vote. Ron's not even running, friends would object. I'd reply, I don't care, that's my guy. Not this year. The stakes are too high. We've got Ku Kluxers in the White House and neo-Nazis in and around its gates. The situation is unmistakable. In this regard, I got taught a hard lesson by my fiercely independent, revolutionary, democratic, and devoutly Christian grandmother. It was a lesson before dying. Grandma and I had this running joke. I would attack Bill Clinton, outraged at his treatment of Lanny Guinier and Sister Soldier. Sorry if I butchered Lanny Guinier's name. I'm not familiar with that person. And Grandma would reply, "What do you want, Bush?" And I'd say, but, to which she'd smile and say, "You like Bush." One day, Grandma had a stroke. I rushed to her hospital bed and my sister said, "Grandma, do you know who this is?" She looked up and said, "He loves Bush." Those were the last words she ever spoke. I've taken the lesson. Sorry, Ron, but I've still got love for you. So again, the name of the article, August 31st, 2020, is "Why I'm Not Voting for My Favorite Candidate This Year." This is a, by implication, vote for Biden article. He doesn't even have the nuts to say it. It's just, and literally concludes on, "You like Trump then? Or you don't want to vote for Biden? You like Trump." That's what he ended with. So again, CPUSA, is it a caucus of the Democratic Party? Are you a member of CPUSA? Have you suffered through this whole video of me talking shit about your favorite radlib group? And do you have something to say? Leave a comment. But I'm telling you, This is nuts. It's nuts for a supposedly Marxist party to think that they're meeting the masses where they're at more by aiming for, air quotes, centrists than the many newly minted socialists coming off the assembly line right now out of the 2008 crash, Occupy, Bernie Sanders, and all the rest. There's millions of us now, and CPUSA is telling us to fuck off. I don't get it. Well, I don't get it taking them at face value as a Marxist party anyway, which, yeah, leads us to speculate on alternative possibilities. Now, again, I do want to say in closing, Trump is bad, okay? Trump is bad. Yes, Trump has surrounded himself with neo-Nazis. It's not good. But let's say we elect Biden. What functionally, substantially is going to change? We'll get more competent imperialists. We will get more dignified white supremacists. We will get people who know how to hide their participation in global capitalism under a more, air quotes, respectable veneer. But you know what's still going to be going on at all the local levels? Is the right's still going to be growing. There was a good article by ProPublica, I think it was last year maybe even, about how they, infiltrated. I mean, it's a Facebook group. It's not that hard to infiltrate. But they got inside a private Facebook group for Customs and Border Patrol, I think maybe like prison guard, corrections officer, workers, agents of the boss class. And what they found in this group of like 10,000 government employees was rancid, hideous, horrifying, hateful, racist, sexist, violently abusive content, like top to bottom. Like that's all it was. Go check it out. ProPublica expose, Facebook group, Customs and Border Patrol. If you type in something like that, you'll find it. That's not going away in a Joe Biden presidency. And that's the kind of thing we have to fight. Again, my theory of what's going to happen in the next 10 years is the capitalist class is going to keep letting the United States get more and more unstable. They're not going to do anything fundamentally different. And things will get more unstable. People will get more desperate. The right, confused as they are, hateful as they are going to keep blaming, imaginary socialists for everything that conservatives and fascists are doing. And things are going to get out of hand. I think that the street battles will continue until they probably just don't really have a distinct start and end anymore. And I think if we don't start organizing for socialism now, like in a really, really concerted way, like join one or more organizations, like as soon as you stop listening to this video, we're going to be caught with our pants down, because I don't think there's a way to stop the instability. Okay. I don't think there's a way to stop it now. And I do think that people doing what CPUSA are doing here are really selling some of the worst kind of false hope. I mean, just like Obama, hope and change, and then it was like a third term of Bush. It's wrong. I mean, it's incorrect analysis. And I think they have such bad takes all the time, and they never really change tact. I've got to assume it's deliberate. So on that note, hopefully this has been educational and interesting for you. Leave a comment. I mean, my audience here is primarily socialists. Are you in the CPUSA? Do you have thoughts about it? Do you know someone who has been in the CPUSA? What do you think? Actually, I did talk to somebody who told me that they were in CPUSA and that there was like some kind of an attempted coup against the like democratic leaning leadership, to like make the organization more radical or something. And of course, we know that PCUSA set up shop about 5 years ago or whatever it was, several years ago, as a direct answer to CPUSA's failures. everything I have heard, well, not everything, but I've heard some not great stuff about PCUSA. I did a video about one of their candidates, Chris Halali, who is, I mean, in my opinion, a swindling con artist. So if they let him become a candidate, let's say I'm skeptical. But let's get this conversation going. What do you think? What do you know? And let's talk organization. On that note, I'm going to head out. This has been Socialism for All. Thanks to our current patrons whose names are on the screen. You can support the show at patreon.com/socialismforall for as little as $2 a month or as many as $200 a month. Every contribution is deeply encouraging to me to keep doing this. Of course, the more actual money I get, the more time I can spend on it. I'm not independently wealthy. You can also follow us at facebook.com/socialismforall. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment here on YouTube. Also, take this video, share it in your Discord groups, in your Reddit groups, in your Facebook groups, wherever you're active. Help spread the videos, help get more people watching. We need to expand these conversations. We need to agitate, educate, and organize. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.